Thanks, everyone. So listen, as Doug said, we're going to focus on measuring successful outcomes. And let's start with some quick introductions. Gian, want to kick us off?
Sure. Jan Falgoni, I'm chairman, co-founder of ComScore. I thought I was getting out of Chicago's weather yesterday until I landed here in San Francisco. We're in the business of measuring the digital world across all of the platforms, including television. You can tell from my comment.
But we're going to get into that.
I'm a little sensitive to the conclusions that are being bandied around. So
yeah.
Anyway.
Great. Eric?
Eric Rosa, CEO of Datalogix. We are focused on connecting digital media with offline sales.
Eric Stein from Epsilon Online Solutions. And Epsilon's the largest data broker in the country and big marketing service provider. And we use that footprint to deliver online marketing solutions as well.
Joe Zawadzki, CEO of MediaMath, a marketing operating system that had the crazy hubris to add math to the name of their company. 7 years ago, that was a crazy notion, and now I think timely and relevant, I hope, right?
Great. Well, welcome, everyone. So hopefully you heard some of the previous session. I'm sure you guys were getting mic'd up, but we're going to follow on some of the discussion that we had there. But before we do that, I wanted to start with a pretty straightforward question. So Joe, why don't you kick us off with this? So what are the 2 or 3 key metrics you see marketers measuring today? Like, what are the few that are really critical that everyone seems to be doing?
Well, there's a really sad answer, which is click-through rates. I don't
want to get into that, because some of the metrics are probably not the right metrics to be.
Yeah, look, there's no question this could consume the following 28 minutes and 17 seconds of the panel, but look,
Joe will do that.
And I will do that. We all know each other. No, I think that you are seeing an increasing sophistication in terms of how people are measuring programs, and I think there's a natural move from some of the easily trackable online-only metrics that I think got us to where we are now. And I think people continually are asking the question of, okay, that makes a lot of sense. This is obviously an upstream proxy. It's obviously something that's a sort of a common currency just to get the transactions to flow. But I think increasingly as the dollars are increasing and people are realizing that small mistakes amplified across larger and larger budgets create real problems, and doing it right creates real opportunity, you're seeing a lot more sophistication where people are truly measuring not just to deeper e-commerce metrics, but increasingly in-store, omni-channel, et cetera. So the long answer to a relatively straightforward question is a real diversity in terms of metrics, but the overall arrow of time is sort of up and to the right, and people are getting more sophisticated, smarter, and a lot of it is because the folks in this room are making it easier.
Okay. So we feel like we are making progress in looking at the right things and measuring for the right sort of outcomes.
Yeah, it depends on how anxious you are as an entrepreneur, how fast that progress is.
Great.
But yes, we're making progress.
Good. Eric, do you have a perspective on that?
Which Eric?
We're going to get a little confused. Let's go Eric R first, and then we'll go Eric.
Yeah, I think there are more metrics being thrown into the mix. What I don't see happening, what I'd like to see happening faster, is not just the adoption and introduction of new metrics, but maybe the discarding of some of the old metrics. So I worry, in kind of the sense
like
of
click-through rate?
Well, I don't want to single any metric out as being bad, but if I were going to single one out, I might single
Hurt metric feelings?
But I think if you think about the metaphor of signal to noise ratio, we're getting more signal into the mix, whether it be bringing in age and gender, which is a currency obviously for how 70 billion in media is traded in the TV world, whether it be things like whether my ad was actually viewable or not, whether it be whether my ad is actually leading to things transacting in stores. Though that's great. The problem is we're bringing along this tail of other stuff that maybe is more proxy oriented along with it. And so we're going to have to be disciplined about cleaving some of that stuff off over time as well.
Okay. Eric S?
I could reiterate what these guys said, because it's absolutely true that there's better metrics coming, and the infusion of data out into the ecosystem makes that more easy to execute against. But one of the things that I think is important, you heard Pat from Williams-Sonoma talk about organizational alignment. And organizational alignment is something that he credited Williams-Sonoma with as a competitive advantage. Organizational alignment can mean a whole bunch of things to a whole bunch of different topics, but organizational alignment around metrics can also be very important, because you'll find some of the digital folks perhaps still aligning around click-through rates or stuff like that. Some of the merchants and other areas within an organization thinking about tying offline conversions. Some of the online channel guys might want to tie it to online conversions. And so getting organizational alignment around metrics, very
Pretty key.
sort of important. And you have better metrics coming to the fore, as Eric and Joe have said, but just getting alignment around it is important.
Sure. No, and that can be very challenging for organizations. And I know Pat kind of talked about some of the things they did at Williams-Sonoma. Have you seen any other things that work well for some of your customers at Epsilon?
In terms of metrics?
Yeah, in terms of not only in metrics, but in terms of aligning the organization around the measurement and the metrics.
Yeah, well, I think demonstrating by example
Okay.
Can help a lot. And so, we've seen with a large telco client that they're looking to reduce churn rate. And the typical metric that they had applied to that had been click-through rates. And are we getting high click-through rates, which, how does that translate? It's a proxy. It's a poor proxy at best. ComScore's done some good studies to show how little click-through actually has to do with the end result. And if you had measured that campaign based on that, you would have had a completely different interpretation of the success of the campaign versus measuring it against actual reduction in churn rate, which we were able to do. Mm-hmm. And it showed the organization that these are important metrics that you can start to use, and you start to get alignment around it that way.
So, Gian, digital marketing in general seems to be very DR focused, and I think with you bridging both television that has less around DR and more branding, and the digital world, what are some of your thoughts on moving digital away from just pure DR focused metrics?
So I think we've made progress, maybe not as fast as we all would like, but certainly the evidence I think now is generally being accepted that the click on the display ad has no relationship to the effectiveness. So I think that's positive. I think the realization that the branding campaigns need to be measured with different metrics. You can't look at them in as short-term a manner as you could on a direct response campaign. I think that's being understood now, which is, I think, going to be really positive because it's going to help move more of the branding dollars, which is what basically TV is, onto the internet. I think the other thing, though, that's happened that's very positive is that two things. First of all, I think the analytical designs that are being used have been dramatically improved. The work that, for example, Datalogix does is tremendous because you're using cookie syncing and you're doing the evaluation at scale, and it eliminates much of the noise that you'd be stuck with if you're just using a panel. The other thing, though, that I would add that I think is a real positive is that it's one thing to measure the outcome, but even if you were measuring the outcome with 100% accuracy, if you don't know for sure what the input was, you are really guessing at what's going on. And what I mean by that is that you really need to be sure that the media plan that was put together is what was actually delivered. Because you're trying to relate the plan back to the impact. And it's pretty clear that the plans in the digital world are just not being delivered the way that was originally thought, whether it's the viewability is a problem, whether it's the targeting accuracy is not what was claimed, whether it's the frequency wasn't right, whether it's that the ads are being delivered out of geography, the ads are being delivered unsafe content. I mean, there's just a litany of stuff that needs to be measured. Once you have the inputs measured, I think you can do a much, much better job of measuring the outputs and relating it back to the input. And I think that's what the branding guys want to see.
I was shocked at that question. The question was, it's such a shame that the internet is a measurable, accountable medium, and boy, how does it get better at branding metrics? And I think it's going to be it's 180. I mean, it has to be the case that marketing is becoming more measurable, and it will be the case that branding is just one continuum, one type of metric that ultimately leads to response. I mean, everybody is in the business as a marketer to sell, to cross-sell, to upsell, to retain, right? Branding is not some like ineffable thing that happens over there with some set of metrics. It is the thing that starts the progression to ultimately direct response. So the right answer is, how do we make everything part of a continuum of response? Some very early in the cycle, some later, some past conversion, right, into word of mouth, into subsequent follow-on second-order effects.
Sure.
But the notion of response needs to encompass everything that we do as
True,
marketers.
true, but it feels like in the digital world, we're very focused on the bottom of the funnel. Like, okay, how are we going to take this from here to here?
Bad metrics are bad.
Yeah.
I really don't agree with that conclusion. I
That's why I said it.
then you got me started on the right path. I mean, look, direct response is really a short-term, immediate reaction to an ad. That's not the way that branding campaigns work. I can guarantee you, after 40 years of measuring this stuff, look, if it wasn't, why is frequency an important issue? I mean, if you look at the frequency response curve of most branding campaigns, you'll see that it takes multiple impressions to generate the sales lift. So you can't equate that to an immediate reaction to a direct response ad, I don't think.
That's correct. It's the notion that response equals immediate is the thing that needs to be broken.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm saying is, if you measure things too quickly, you might,
Yes, don't do that.
you might well conclude that a branding campaign isn't working, whereas if you looked at it a month later or 2 months later, it has an effect. And so I don't think you can use the same approach to measuring the effectiveness of branding campaigns than you can direct response.
Is it just the fact that it will take longer to really measure the results of it? Or are there things that we can look at as the incremental steps to stronger branding?
Yeah, I think everybody wants to measure things faster, right? Real-time measurement is the goal.
Continuous.
I think there's a real downside to it. My belief is that the downside to real-time measurement is that we will start measuring price and promotion effects more than advertising effects, because there's nothing that moves the needle faster than discounting the price of a product, right? Works faster than any advertising you can think of. And so one just word of caution is, I think what I'm saying, maybe words of caution, be careful about reading this stuff really, really fast and concluding that you're seeing ad effects, because you might not be.
If I heard you correctly asking your question before, you were sort of questioning the value of surveys and that sort of approach, which has been a tried and true practice of sort of like the brand metrics of awareness or intent to purchase or that kind of stuff. How do people measure awareness better? I have some thoughts as to how we've helped people do it, but with your experience.
I'd love to hear some of those. Let's kind of get into that, because I think that's a really important point.
Let me just hog the stage here, but let me just clarify what I was saying. I wasn't saying that within a medium that you can't use survey research effectively. What I was saying is that if you use an online survey panel and ask people how much time they spend on the internet versus watching television, you will get an answer that's skewed to the internet. All right? Just like if you ask them, how much do you spend online versus how much do you spend in a store? You'll get it skewed to the internet. And so in cross-platform research is where I think you've got to be careful about using survey panels. Within a medium, fine.
With regards to some of those other metrics, awareness is not something that you measure as easily as sales.
Sure.
So you have to start to tie an action to the awareness, and I don't know if we've come up with the silver bullet to say like this is the awareness metric, but what we have been able to do is to take a lot of the data assets that we can bring to bear onto that question, and provide our clients with insight as to whether it's qualified awareness, whether it's qualified reach or not. Because you can all think of the scenario where a luxury car manufacturer goes out and does a campaign and gets all sorts of activity on their website and is super psyched about the success of their campaign. Little do they know that it was the 17-year-old boys designing fancy luxury cars on their site. So that's awareness, but it's not qualified awareness.
It's not the right awareness.
And so putting data that you can trust and data that you understand behind those campaigns and to give insight into the metrics that you're relying on has been where
it works. Good.
I think it's important to just remember, incentives drive behavior, right? And so to the extent, and I'll stack that to jam it with another cliche that says you can't manage what you can't measure. So you take those two forces and you say, I'm going to set up a metric that, or set of metrics that I know are false, and I'm going to align my organization and my supply chain and my vendors around a North Star that doesn't tie to the thing that the CFO cares about. By definition, you may get lucky if you're correlated, but as a general rule, I think it should be the goal of marketers to constantly think, like, what is actually moving the needle for the business? And to the extent that the metric that we're all pointed at feels wrong, right? I mean, and I much malign the click, and I'm sorry, it's been a hot button in a couple of recent conversations. But if you just think about it, like our own personal experience as consumers, who here loves clicking on banner ads?
Who here has clicked on a banner ad?
Great.
The guy in the back in the white shirt I saw.
So we are, when you're doing that, you are saying that my own personal experience is wrong, that there's a population of people out there that have this behavior that nobody in this room does. None of our friends, none of our peers, like, we're going to buy Teslas, right? We would never click on a banner ad, but somebody else will, and they're buying this stuff, right? And when it feels so wrong, right, what you really hope, if you're good data scientists, is that one, you're going to confirm intuitions that are obvious, and you're going to discover some new things, right? The thing that a click is not telling you is that you are discovering a new thing, right? It's not that there's this population of people; it's that it's wrong. And so I think I'm using that as a very shallow, sort of upstream thing, but we should constantly be asking ourselves, like, what is the thing that is closer to truth? And be cognizant of the level of effort it takes to get one step closer to truth in terms of customer quality, in terms of stage in the funnel, in terms of pulling in what's happening in trackable mediums, or people buying in store, or people calling the call center. But ultimately, the goal should be that we are getting closer and closer to driving things that really happen in the real world.
Yeah.
And if you stop too early, like, that's a problem.
Yep. Okay. So let's assume as marketers that we can measure perfectly. And Eric R., I'm going to direct this one at you. If we could, as marketers, measure things perfectly, do you think that would change the way we're marketing? Like, do you think there would be a shift in the way budgets are being allocated?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big suspension of disbelief,
Sure,
right?
Of course. But we can,
Well, if we didn't believe that, I think a number of us were wasting our time right now, right? So in other words, again, we'll keep picking on the click, right? While he's down, we're going to punch him. If the click is a good proxy for sales activities for things that transact offline, like CPG products and cars and so on, so we know it's not, but if it is, then we shouldn't spend all this incredibly valuable time and valuable resource to get the real metrics. In other words, if you have a good proxy that's really easy to collect, you should just stick with that proxy. And so, I mean, we now have validated many times over what I think ComScore has validated for years, right, which is this lack of correlation. And in some cases, inverse correlation. Auto is my favorite thing of all times, is we showed an auto company, an OEM, a couple of years ago, who optimizes almost everything to clicks, and by the way, continues to, so I'm not going to say who it is, that the people who clicked on their ads were less likely to buy a car the next 90 days. And the people who saw the ads and didn't click on them, to Joe's point, there's nobody in the history of Tesla's advertising, I don't even know if they do display ads, but if they did, nobody clicking on those ads has enough money to buy a Tesla, I can guarantee you that. And so that was not actually that counterintuitive once you dug into it and understand kind of the demographic skews between clickers and non-clickers. But so I would contend that, yeah, if you can measure this stuff perfectly or even a little less imperfectly, it drives massive changes in marketing. In other words, there's a tremendous amount of arbitrage in the system, and we're doing our work to take a little bit more out every day, but it's going to take a long time.
A little better, a little better.
I think one of the reasons is that one of the reasons why the click is still used. We ran a survey a while back where we asked a sample of publishers, agencies, and advertisers, how often do you use the click for advertising evaluation? And a third of them said always. And when I kind of dug into it.
And the other 2/3 were lying.
When I dug into it, one of the things I started to conclude is that one of the reasons it's still being used doesn't cost anything, and it's fast, and it's simple. And
Easy to measure.
And we preached it at them
Right?
for a long time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's the way it started, right? But so I think that's unfortunately the friction that's still holding it there. But it's improved.
So,
for sure.
But nobody's had anything to replace it with either for a while,
well,
right?
and could part of it as well be that we're just really impatient as marketers, and we want something that's
Well,
I
the
can get
immediate-
my hands
it's
on
cheap
immediately.
And it's
cheap,
I mean, we
it's
hit both
easy.
things. It's cheap and easy, and there's immediate gratification. It's probably harder to misinterpret than some of the metrics that we'll track. For example, there's so many ways to misinterpret sales data and to get causality wrong and all that.
Yeah.
Well, I think in part it goes back to the description of the internet as the most measurable medium. Well, yeah, but doesn't mean that the measures are correct.
Is it the right measures?
necessarily?
Yeah.
I think that's where it all started back in the early days. You can click on it. Let's use that as the metric. And I think the evidence then accumulated that it wasn't predicting the real impact
real
of the
conversion.
campaigns. I mean, look, what is it like 1 in 1,000 ads in a campaign that clicked on? I think that's the number that DoubleClick has now put out. I mean, that's if you believe that number, right? If you believe the click, that number tells you these ads are not working at all.
Yeah.
Bots love them, though.
What?
Bots love
love 'em.
clicking.
There you go. All right, let's switch gears. Let's talk about data. And Eric S. and John, you guys just announced a partnership around measurement and using some of Epsilon's third-party data. Talk a little bit about the role that data plays in measurement and third-party data specifically. I'll direct that to Eric S. first.
Well, so the third-party data that we can bring to bear, I think, is of value in amplifying, providing more depth to trusted methodologies and reports like VCE from Comscore, which is, I think, at the foundation of the partnership that was announced last week. What we see in terms of being able to use that data for measurement is along the lines of what I talked about before. We can start with a qualified audience. We can, in a variety of different ways, take that data and make it actionable online, enable it for our customers to use, whether in targeting or measurement. And then if the measurement metric is something that you want to tie to offline sales, we have the data relationships and the means to tie it back to log files that we get when we deliver a campaign through MediaMath. And all of this is from a sort of trusted third party, Epsilon in our case, where they can rely on what we're reporting to them. And yes, there are lots of issues along the way, and clients like Williams-Sonoma push us on incrementality and add a lot of great insight into how we're thinking about reporting it. But those are the ingredients that go into these types of programs. And the third-party data or the first-party data is, an important.
Two critical pieces, as you
Yeah,
say?
it's an important. It's a critical element to start it all.
Yeah.
Start the process.
Yeah. Now, Eric R., I know DataLogic's measurement is a big part of your business. Can you shed some insight on that as well? Third party versus first party, and are they both necessary to effectively measure? And
I don't think I think broadly speaking, they're both necessary. I think for each individual use case, not necessarily, right? So if you take a retailer with a great loyalty program and/or who ships most of their products to somebody's home, then they don't really need third-party data, right? Okay. If you take a retailer who doesn't have a great loyalty program, sells a lot of stuff in store, is not capturing great information, then they're going to need a third party. If you take a CPG brand or another brand that's selling primarily through somebody else's sales outlet, then they're going to need third-party data. Interestingly, the automotive guys, even though they have CRM databases, don't have the kind of data that they really need to do the full closed-loop measurement. So it's very much vertical dependent.
Okay.
And it tends to tie very closely to whether somebody has a really good CRM database that is about purchasing. So CRM database acquired through email capture when you visit a recipe website doesn't help you that much, right?
I think it's also not an either or, it's a yes and, right? A lot of retailers have very rich data around their first party audience, but most marketers don't have as many customers as they would like. That's why they're marketing, right? And so taking the deep, rich data set you have in and around first party, layering in third party to basically say, how can I round out this profile, right, for a couple of purposes, right? One, describe my customers better through a combination of sources so I can literally understand what's going on, where the output of that may have nothing to do with your media buying or your targeting or anything else, right? It may be around creating different promotions, different products, different experiences for different cohorts that you didn't understand, given you didn't have the third-party overlay, and then turning around and saying, look, I don't have first-party data on all of my prospects, almost by definition, and therefore, taking lookalike modeling, basically saying, okay, I'm going to take this and I'm going to understand with a much broader set of data, in fact, a superset of third-party sources, who should I be buying that look like my best prospects, and how do I, again, engage them and move them through the funnel?
Get them through.
So it is both of those in marriage, not like you're a first-party marketer or a third-party marketer. Every marketer should, in fact, be both.
I agree, and there's one other example, which a little bit more esoteric maybe, but very important. Eric alluded to the complexities around getting causality right when you're trying to attribute something to an online campaign and you're dealing with a marketer who spends a ton of money on TV, like a big CPG brand or an automotive company. It turns out that to structure the control group right and make sure that the people who didn't see the ad look exactly like the people who saw the ad, you actually want to pull in as much data as you can, and that's been a big part of the kind of science that we've injected into media measurement over the last few years. So it actually turns out that third-party data is incredibly valuable to get the control group definition right, which is critical to getting causality right, even when somebody has great first-party data.
There's one other benefit of the third-party data, which is an interesting one, which is that if you're the manufacturer and you're dealing with a retailer, you might want to convince the retailer that your campaign isn't just causing the consumer to shift from brand A to brand B with no net growth in the category for the retailer. You want to be able to show, I think increasingly today, the retailers demanding that there's an incremental benefit for them in terms of total category sales, certainly happening in CPG, and that's where the third-party data can, I think, play an important,
Really help on that.
role.
Yeah. Okay. So you bring up like test and control methodology versus kind of a continuous methodology. We explored this in the first half hour in terms of maybe the need to move away from just a pure test and control to something where there's more continuous measurements. Any thoughts to share there?
I think you need both.
You do?
For people who are human and do marketing, you tend to have an impulse towards somewhat semi-immediate gratification. And so I think if there's a vacuum there, metrics that are less robust, whatever we want to call it, whatever our euphemism is for clicks right now, are going to kind of fill the gap. So I do think you need to, I think there's value in relaxing some of the causality stuff in order to get some interim read. The danger is that isn't leading you towards the same conclusion as the good causal measurement.
Sure.
I think that the test and control works really well if you're looking at an isolated component of the marketing plan, right? A/B kind of testing, but which is fine, and there's a lot of value to that. But I think on top of that, we need improved attribution modeling to get at the full impact of the marketing plan, so that you're not just reading the impact of the digital component. You're reading digital, you're reading television, you're reading whatever they're running in print, et cetera. I think that's where there's probably some tremendous progress about to be made using these cookie syncing approaches. So,
I think we're, generally speaking, not even far enough along basic test and control in most organizations in terms of, being willing to invest enough in a continuous cycle of that. One of my board members is Nigel Morris, the founder of Capital One, and really early on he had this really interesting insight, and he said, we are, everyone thinks of us as a credit card company or a diversified financial services company. He's since gone for the past 5 or 6 years, but he said, we never thought of ourselves that way. He said we were a test and learn company. We were an information-based strategy company that happened to issue credit cards, right? But the centrality of rigorous analytics and rigorous testing was such that like marketing analytics ran the company. Mm-hmm. And they were the ones that said, credit cards are an underserved market. We should go ahead and get in this space. And to the extent that marketing organizations, again, don't feel the importance of analytics and test and learn yet, then some notion that there's some like continuous intelligence process that can be bought. I think again, if good organizations will adapt themselves if they kind of hold that belief. And I think we're at the early stages of that.
it is a cultural issue. I think that maybe the older the company, the more difficult it is to get into that mindset of continuous experimentation. Where publicly, Amazon has said that that's the way they run their business, right? They run thousands of these things. How many price changes are they making in a day? Was it 1 million or 2 million, something like that? Some staggering number. And they really get it, the value of this, this continuous experimentation. But I think most companies
Don't have that sort of discipline.
Just don't have it yet.
Yeah. Okay. Well, listen, we're out of time. This was a great discussion. Thank you all for joining us up here.
You're welcome.
Thank you.